Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. I'm Jennifer J.J. Manella here with Drew Conry Murray. Today, we're talking mobile security and threat management. Our guest started his career pulling burner phones off suspects as a beat cop in Baltimore, and we need to ask him, Drew, next time more about that.
We totally left that out, yeah.
Yeah, we skimmed right past that, but we're definitely going to have him back. But today, Akili Akridge leads mobile security programs for Fortune 100s and federal agencies, finding the cracks in a world where our phones know more about us than our families do.
Yeah, so today we discussed things like mobile device management, how it's evolved into mobile application management and mobile threat detection, how they differ, why you might want to consider one over the other, why every org actually needs mobile threat detection. JJ, we get into Apple versus Android. We also talk about things like Pegasus and zero-click malware, so great conversation. Stick around.
And if you're chomping for more at the end of this, we do plan to have Akili back to do a little bit more of a technical deep dive. If that's of interest, we would love to hear from you guys about what you'd like to dive into. So let's get going.
So Akili, welcome to the show. Just kind of set the table for us. Obviously, mobile devices have been a target since they first came out, but why are they, a rich environment for attackers to go after?
Yeah, thanks, Drew, and thanks for having me. In reference to mobile devices, they're such a rich target because they're ubiquitous, always on, and they are promiscuous, right? I kind of think back to the Timbaland and Nelly Furtado song, Promiscuous, right? Like,
as soon as you said that, yep, I'm singing in my head, I'm bouncing.
Yeah, exactly. If you know the lyrics, right, I'm gonna spare you with singing, right? I don't want anybody's ears to bleed, but basically, your device is always talking, always chatting, always looking for something to connect to. And it's across several different modals, right? Wi-Fi, cellular, Bluetooth, NFC. It has all of these different pathways into it. And it's always looking for someone to talk to. So that's why I say it's promiscuous, right? It's always trying to find someone to connect with. It's always looking for some sort of situationship to happen, right? So in addition to that, when you tether in the fact that this device has more information about you than your parents, your best friend, and your spouse combined, you're talking about a target-rich entity, right? It's got your personal data. It's got your corporate data, if you have your corporate data on there, if you have it connected to your corporate environment. It's got your financials. It's got your location data. It's got biometric information about you that you didn't even know yourself. This device knows you, has you fingerprinted better than you know yourself or anyone else does. So it creates such a target-rich entity for threat actors to attack that it also provides a compelling case for it being a diverse attack surface, right? So I said earlier, you have cellular, you have Wi-Fi, you've got Bluetooth, NFC, you have all these different pathways in, but you also have different parts of it that are going to present different attack surfaces, like the operating system, like the applications that you put on these devices, and that we all have different applications that we use for different reasons, for tracking calendars, and now for AI usage, all the way to, hailing a cab, or what used to be a cab, right? You have Uber, right? You have all of these things that are tracking your data and it's storing it somewhere. And that somewhere is either on your device temporarily or permanently, right? So it creates such a large focal point for threat actors where if they can penetrate and get access to that, they have a swath of data at their fingertips.
And Drew and I covered, so I'm kind of going back to this whole promiscuous and all of the different interfaces and ways to get, in and out and through a phone and the data that it's collecting, because some of the stuff that we've covered in our news segments were, God, Drew, I guess it was last year because we talked to somebody that had just presented at DEF CON about, Apple's database for the Wi-Fi networks that it collects. So basically, every device moving around the world, if it sees a Wi-Fi network for a certain period of time, it throws it into this Apple database, which is accessible by anyone from anywhere, unlimited, so it's not throttled at all, and unauthenticated. And so they were actually able to watch, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, the troop movements through that, as well as, in other parts of the Middle East. So we've seen that. At some point, we stopped having control over what our phones were doing because there was a point in time where we could just turn the GPS off and it was off.
Hmm.
And I don't know
Hmm.
when, but at some point it's like, well, you can turn location services off, but the phone, the carrier, that MNO, and then all of the apps that you've given certain permissions to on the back end or not, still have that location data, even though you think you removed it from them at least temporarily. And I'm curious, like, where was that inflection point of, we had control over the interfaces on our phone to, oh, it's just going to auto report everything that we're doing in geolocation data, because the geolocation data isn't just GPS, it uses Wi-Fi and, probably even Bluetooth as well.
That's a great question, JJ. And I think as I look back historically to what was the point that everything shifted, it's going to sound really bad, but I think it's when we went from flip phones to smartphones, right?
Hmm.
When we went to that single pane of glass style of phone, the usage of the device started to go up because now you have a different way of interacting with your device. And now you're starting to see applications, right? Flip phone beforehand, what was your applications? Snake, right? Like,
And texting.
yeah, texting, some sort of ringtone downloader so you can download some song and play it as your ringtone. But when we went to the phones that we know today, that single pane of glass, it now increased our functionality on the device. And with that increased functionality and also increase of sensors on board the device, it kind of goes back to monetary, right? The amount of data that can be tracked or pulled or gleaned from these devices is worth dollars to someone somewhere, right?
Well, yeah, lots of somewheres. I think that's the problem, right?
Exactly. I had a friend of mine, he told me a long time ago, he's into app dev and he's been at several different startups. And he said, if it's for free, you are for sale,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that means you and your data.
So when mobile devices got really popular and also got more possible, the industry sort of went through the whole BYOD movement where there was an effort to get some kind of controls on the phone to provide a little bit of risk management. What would you say the BYOD state looks like today? Is it doing a good job of addressing risk?
I want to be clear about this. Absolutely not.
Okay, that was clear.
I got to call it ace and a spade a spade. I think our BYOD situation is in dire straits. I think we're at the point where a lot of people or a lot of entities paid a blind eye to the BYOD and personal devices that actually touch their environment. And they have done themselves a disservice by allowing personal devices without any controls, right?
Mhm.
Which is really hard to claw back controls after the fact.
Yeah.
Right. So over the years, as we have become more mobile as a society, right, more dependent upon our mobile devices, our devices have increased in their functionalities and we're able to do far more than we used to with our mobile devices. When COVID hit, then everybody went home, right? And now you're talking about people are moving around, people are traveling, and they're working almost totally from their mobile devices. And a lot of entities kind of opened the floodgates and said, hey, you can use your personal devices, but they didn't put in controls or parameters around it. That is what I feel is going to be the crux of a lot of different companies and entities' pain points when it comes to mobile, because you've now opened the floodgates in an effort of good faith, right? You wanted to provide your employees with a way to continue working with something that was functional for them and for you. There's like a happy middle ground. But now you have to put some controls around it because otherwise you are inherently adopting all of the risks that are associated with that personal device directly into your environment.
Right. And that person's behavior outside the office too.
Exactly. And you'd be surprised. Actually, probably not, but like, you'd be surprised to see how people use their personal devices is far more reckless than if they would how they would use a corporate device, right? Your laptop, your work laptop is used completely differently than a personal laptop. So now when you start to blend the two and blur that line, there's a significant amount of lack of centralized management, right? Because you don't know what's touching your environment. You don't know where it came from. It could be a jailbroken iPhone inside of a Russian prison that is literally reaching out and touching your corporate data. And you also don't have any threat detection and response built in. And also there's a massive amounts of mobile data leakage, especially when it comes to applications that people are putting on their personal devices, right? So the amount of risk that comes with the BYOD, unless it's mitigated through an actual BYOD strategy that has some sort of MDM, MAM, or MTD solution in place with additional visibility and security built in, you're opening yourselves to a lot of potential risk.
There's two kind of lines of thought, Akili, from what you've just said there. And I think one has to do with that application risk and the things that people are installing. And I want to go down that rabbit hole just a little bit. And then the other one is you hit the nail on the head here when you talked about kind of MTD and like mobile, threat detection and maybe even response, which is completely different above and beyond our traditional mobile device management technologies. So I want to go down that first little side trail for a second and talk about the apps. Well, first of all, I think organizations and people, so, Akili, you and I have talked about this before. A lot of my work right now happens to be around BYOD strategies, everything from the legal considerations and policy and compliance down to the technical controls. You and I connected on this. I think you and I think very similarly on some things. So you've got a lot deeper knowledge in some of these areas. So I'm so excited about this. But these apps, so I think everybody thinks that, oh, well, Google Play Store is going to save me. Apple Store is going to save me. And we see like not quite weekly, but almost weekly, at least once a month, where some malicious app slipped through. There's already that piece, like fake password managers that people are downloading because they think it's Keeper or LastPass or something. But then there's Temu and Snapchat and like all of these other things. And one of the things that I think is so alarming, and I guess it's, because we work in this space, it's alarming to me, are the number of apps from companies that provide consumer goods from outside of the US into the US who want you to download their app to interact with them and buy from them. So for example, you can't shop Temu without downloading their app.
Right.
I bought pants from a company called Halara that ships from China. And every time I buy something from them, I get a card and it's basically like, we'll give you $20 of credit or $50 of credit or like not $5.
Yeah, significant.
They're very enticing if you will download our app. And so to me, I find that very alarming because like you said, if something's free, you are the product. And so I think there's an interesting thought process to go down of personal device or not personal device. There's I feel like a lot of risk and a lot of these apps are just doing stuff behind the scenes that we don't understand and we don't know where that data is going and what it's pulling from and where it's feeding to. So I'm curious your thoughts about that before we talk about, threat detection on mobile devices.
And JJ, you're about to go down this rabbit hole.
Eat the mushroom. Let's go down it is a rabbit hole. Yeah, the white rabbit.
We're going to go for a ride, everybody. Buckle up. Okay, so you're absolutely right. I want to go back to what you touched on earlier. And I also want to just say it one more time so that this gets locked into their heads. If it is free, you are what's for sale, right? You are the product. So let's touch on the Google Play Store, right? When Google started doing apps, it was wide open. It was the Wild West, right? You could go on there, you could create an app and it was just up there. There wasn't too many checks and balances and it was great until it wasn't. And then they started discovering, wow, there's a lot of malicious applications here. It's difficult to identify a malicious application because the front end is usually providing something innocuous, right? Something that is maybe functional. You think it's going to help you with something. Like you said, it's going to help store my passwords, right? That is a terrible, terrible place to put it, but it's going to help me store my passwords, or it's going to help me track the calories that I burn, or it's going to do something else that's going to be functional. It's going to help me track the stars and align zodiac signs, whatever it is.
I have that app.
No judgment. No judgment. Okay.
Although I have to tell you, in my defense, it was Howard Schmidt that showed me that app, one of the former directors of cybersecurity for the White House back in the day. So I feel vindicated.
At an astrology app?
Yeah, like the night sky where you can kind of hold it up and it geolocates and you can see the different constellations.
It's cool.
Okay, we're talking an astronomy app, not an astrology app.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to get clear on that. Thank you. I feel a little better now.
We listen and we don't judge. Okay.
If JJ had an astrology app, I'd be a little judgy.
Well, I mean, if something's also going to tell me my lucky numbers for the day, that's cool too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
For some. So the point is, when you download these apps on the front end, you can't tell, right? You think you're getting what you signed up for. right? It was free, or maybe it was even cheap, right? Maybe it was $2 or $3. You downloaded it, great. But on the back end, you're not seeing what's happening. You're not seeing all of the different connections it's making. You're not seeing all of the different sensors that it's leveraging. And back in the day, it allowed for apps to reach across to other apps and grab permissions. And so you were having these applications that were just absolutely rampant, over permissioned, and really collecting a lot more data on you. A lot of people have probably seen this before when you download like a calculator app and it's like, I need permissions to your camera. And you're like, well, if it's a calculator app, why do you need permissions to my camera?
The hell you do.
Yeah, right. I need permissions to your geolocation. Oh, I also need permissions to your text and external libraries. So there's all of these applications that people in the past used to be like, allow. I need this, allow. And next thing you know, it's making connections back to Russia or China or some other location that you don't necessarily want your data going to. So for those applications inside of the Google Play Store, they started to clean things up, but I feel it's a little too late, right? The Google Play Store absolutely exploded. There's so many apps on there, and trying to go back after the fact and clean up is a massive challenge. iOS is a little different, right? They've kind of had this walled garden approach where they say, hey, we're very strict about our applications. We're going to do a lot of checks and balances. And it's actually pretty rigorous. You have to go through an actual procedure of identifying yourself when you're going to develop an app. Now, once you get past that, your app can change, right? The app can shift. You can do updates. Your app can go from being a great application 1 month to the next month going through an update and becoming a very malicious application, right? So for threat actors, time is on their side, and they can literally just kind of play the long game and say, hey, this application is going to be legit on the front end for the first 60 days, and then we're going to flip it to being malicious for 2 weeks after we've got a lot of buy-in. And, we're going to collect. And then after that, we'll flip it back to being non-malicious, and no one will know.
Are there examples of that happening?
It's challenging to track that unless you have an app library that allows for you to see applications change and shift. So here's one for you. It was RedNote. The RedNote application came out, and it was not malicious on the back end, right? You were looking at all of the calls that it was making, all of the permissions that it had. It didn't seem too malicious, right? It just kind of seemed like a run-of-the-mill application that just needed the permissions that it needed to provide the functionality that it actually stated it was going to provide. And then something changed, and it shifted. And RedNote, you saw the RedNote application become malicious, right? And then that raised a lot of flags, and people started getting a little worried. So then you saw the RedNote application shift back, right? So there's this timeline that happens where not malicious, over permissioned, accessing a lot of data, transmitting a lot of data, back down to not malicious, or at this point, suspect at best.
So they do whatever they need to do to get as many downloads while slipping through the cracks between the stores. And I know you said Apple has a better handle on things. I do believe that's true. But even just this year, there's reports of, Apple having to take down malicious common apps from their app stores. Some are copycats, some are what you just described of started life as something, innocuous, grew into something with fangs, and then, floated back or got kicked off the ecosystem.
Yep. I think it's a lot more common and a lot more prevalent than we think. And it's challenging to track because it's a shapeshifter, right? Shapeshifters are hard to catch. And when you go through trying to identify shapeshifters, it's usually a very finite amount of time that you have to catch that. Unless you have a rolling repository or a rolling library that can tell you, we scanned this application on Tuesday, on Thursday we scanned it and it was malicious, and then on Friday we scanned it and it was legitimate. Truncated timeline, but you understand what I'm saying.
Let's talk about that from a detection standpoint then, because, that other little path we were going down is we've had mobile device management, or MDM, for forever, like dinosaurs roaming the world of mobile applications, right? And, typically, if you're not familiar with, those are the things that'll do things like say, okay, if, it puts an app on the phone. So in the Microsoft world, that's the Intune app and the corporate, whatever they call the corporate app thing. And it, okay, it can't be jailbroken. It has to have a screen lock. It has to have a PIN or biometrics or whatever. Maybe it's, containerized and encrypted, but really beyond that, there's no vulnerability management or threat detection built into those platforms. We're starting to see little fragments of those features from different providers. You probably know more about this ecosystem. I haven't yet seen a good one that does both Apple and Android. But can we talk about like what is that blind spot that we've had with MDM? And then what are some of these, mobile threat management, mobile threat detection solutions that are out there, and what are they doing differently? And can they help this app thing? Because, I don't know about the rest of you guys. I go through my app list on my phone regularly and I revoke and uninstall things I'm not using anymore. However, even still doing that, my app list is in the scores. It's not 10 or 12 to work with. It's probably closer to, somewhere between 50 and 100 apps that I use regularly for different things.
Yeah. All right. So let's start with the solutions. Actually, let's back up to MDM. You're right. MDM is an absolute dinosaur. And for some reason, people and entities feel that when they implement MDM, they're checking the box for securing their BYOD or mobile device environment, and they are absolutely not. MDM, mobile device management, is a management product. It is not a security product. It is not a visibility product. It is a management product. So hoping that you're going to get some sort of security out of your MDM is a little foolhardy. Let's layer on top of that MAM, right? You have MDM, you have MAM, mobile application management. Mobile application management, although I feel is better than MDM, it is not security, right? It might put up a little bit of restrictions around protecting your data, which is great, right? Because when you start talking about accessing data from personal devices or from these mobile devices, you want to make sure that you have some sort of container around your data so that your data doesn't just leave, right? A little bit of DLP put in place to help protect yourself better.
Yeah, sorry, can you explain what a MAM is? It is just essentially that it's managing the applications on the phone.
Exactly. MAM is mobile application management. So mobile application management is a solution that allows for you to protect an application. Now, MAM, I've seen it offered by Microsoft in Intune, and it allows for you to protect the applications in the N365 suite. And then there's also a couple other tie-ins where you can possibly add in some other applications that, if they are really important to you, you can try to build in an SDK that will allow for them to be pulled into that protective bubble. But MAM is what I would consider an enhanced form of MDM. But I'd still want to make sure that there's a difference between the two, because MDM is managing the device, right? So there's device controls, there's specific things that you can do that you can push to the device, you can pull from the device. You have a lot more control around the device. Still not security, but control. For MAM, you're putting a lot more controls around your data, right? So they work well in tandem.
MDM and MAM.
Correct.
Yeah, but I'm going to throw this out there because I think the MAM world for us right now is a little wonky.
Mm-hmm.
So from the Microsoft perspective, we have the whole suite of, conditional access policies, yada, yada. But one of the things that's been happening is, like, I know a lot of the Fortune 100s I work with, and even the smaller organizations, one of the things is, okay, well, from a personal device, we want you to be able to use, email and calendar and maybe, Teams, but we don't want you into the SharePoint where we're storing, internal protected data. And for a while, that was great and fine. You had a conditional access policy. It says if it's an Intune registered personal device, you get this, you don't get that. And then Microsoft did something funky on the back end, didn't really communicate that well. And suddenly Teams and certain functions within the Exchange ecosystem were tied to SharePoint. And you can't say, oh, you get these things and you don't get that thing. And I know there's some weird, twisty, backflip ways around that, but it's not easy. It's not well communicated. And when you're dealing with a SaaS application, they're changing stuff on the back end that you don't understand. And I know a lot of the clients I work with have to, the only answer we've had is just continuously test and validate your controls are working as you think they will.
Right.
And then I have friends managing, CISOs that are managing, the Google suite, the G Suite, and everything I've heard, from people around that space is they're asking for these features, and that whole, MAM and conditional access policy is just not even at the point where Microsoft is. So I totally agree. I think if we can get to MAM for the bulk of the users, we can solve a lot of problems without being, so in their device and invasive in that way, which is a legal liability for everybody.
100%.
But we're just like, I just want there to be some magic, crystal ball or something, where just some solution that will actually work the way that we think it will when it comes to MAM. And I feel like we're not there yet.
And can you put a little bit more context around what we actually mean by application management? What am I doing to manage? And it's only just a set of prescribed applications that are being managed, not every app on the phone, right?
Right. So these applications are being protected in the sense that I can put controls around them and I can say, hey, if you want to access this application, there's a certain set of requirements that must be met first. Your device cannot be jailbroken or rooted. You have to have a PIN that's over 6 digits.
Hmm.
You can put all these different parameters around it. It's not an extensive amount, but it's enough to try to make the device have a better security posture than without it, right?
And you put like the software version of the phone as a condition?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can say like, hey, the operating system has to be N-1.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Or, you have to have at least the latest and greatest in terms of the applications themselves,
Hmm.
right? The applications have to stay up to date,
Hmm.
right? So you can put all these parameters around the applications and then around the actual access of the applications.
So I want to get back on the threat detection chain.
For threat detection, mobile device security is a lot like any other security. Layering is your best friend. As long as everybody can play well together, as long as you layer, the better the layering, the better you'll be. And I say that because there's no silver bullet, right? There's no silver bullet that provides MAM and MTD and a little bit of MDM, but not too much MDM that it's over invasive, right? Like, you know, there's no silver bullet. So it's really based upon what's best for your org, but you have to layer. So what I've seen be successful is layering for BYOD, layering MAM with an MTD solution, and then also with a browser protection solution. Now, I say these three because you're addressing, hey, let's protect the data with MAM and make sure that the device is actually meeting specific standards and requirements. With the MTD solution, that gives you your security visibility, where it says, I know everything that's happening with this device, right? And I can say, if this device plugs into an OMG cable that they thought was just a regular cable at an airport and unknowingly just wanted to charge their phone because they were on 10% after they got off their flight, I can shut down access to the applications or the data that is a corporate data, ultimately protecting it. And then I can also notify the actual user that, hey, whatever you just plugged into, unplug, right? Whatever network that you just jumped onto, this is a rogue network, jump off of that network, right?
So when you say threat detection, are we talking about phone behaviors? Are we talking about like AV and anti-malware detection? What's the scope?
So it really depends on your MTD provider. I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not getting paid by them. I have used successfully and seen a lot of success with using Zimperium. Zimperium has a very robust MTD solution that gives you levels of visibility into the device that allow for you to base it off of, you mentioned basically like CVEs,
Hmm.
right? And other more known threats and attacks. They have an entire library dedicated to that. Then they also have an entire library dedicated to applications that are malicious because they scan constantly. So, two of the threat vectors that you have between hardware and operating system vulnerabilities, as well as application vulnerabilities, application risk, and malicious applications, are covered in the one solution of MTD. Then they also have, and I mentioned the hardware piece, where they can see, hey, look, you connected to a rogue Wi-Fi, or hey, there's a device or there's some sort of threat actor that is trying to access your device physically, a OMG cable or via some sort of other physical attack, and they can recognize this because they sit so low in the chain that they can understand when the actual attack chain is happening. They can see when it's happening, right? So they can give you early warnings.
Achille, is something that class of products, are you seeing that and slash would you consider it for just corporate owned devices or personal devices as well in a BYOD program, or is it too invasive for that?
No, I think I would consider it for both. Definitely for corporate. Like for corporate, you cannot just roll blind and just have your devices with MAM on there and say, hey, I hope we're doing good. You need to have that level of visibility so that you can take action when action needs to be taken, right? For the BYOD, it's a little bit different because people have privacy, right? They want to have a little bit of protection. But at the same time, what you're offering from a corporation to the end user like as a person that works for a company, for you to say, hey, the narrative is this. I'm not trying to track you. We are not trying to track you. We are looking to protect our data that we have given you access to on your personal device. Through that level of access, I need to protect that data. Therefore, I need to protect you because the line has become too blurred between personal and corporate. And I now have to protect you from a holistic stance, right? So I'm not sitting here leveraging this data, trying to figure out if you're at work or not, or what you're doing with your free time or where you are. But it's much more of a, hey, I need to know, is your device compromised? Is your device under attack? Are you connecting to a known bad network? So I can make smart decisions about protecting our corporate data.
Yeah. And I think, corporate culture, one of the questions constantly is like, what is everybody else doing? Or what is
Yeah.
everybody else in my, industry or segment doing? And it's such an impossible question to answer because it really does come down to corporate culture and what's been acceptable and what is leadership leaning into and allowing. And you can't roll up in there and swing the pendulum from far left to far right or vice versa. You've got to kind of walk everybody through with, a champions program for some of these. But for some organizations and some people, I have colleagues that I work with, whether they're at a client organization or IANS research, that are, a hard no on personal devices in a business environment. I'm curious your thoughts about like where you personally, not speaking on behalf of any organization you've, worked for in the past, but, your personal feeling about where is that slider? Is it in the middle where we just need to do it, but do it thoughtfully? Is it, look, we should really only do BYOD if we have to for a business objective and to support the culture and keep a happy workforce, or is it just a hard no?
Try not to sigh too hard when I give you this very political answer, but it depends. It
Yeah.
depends, honestly, right? And I say that because every company's mission is different, right? If your mission is in the mission of keeping secrets, working for the government as a contracting entity or an FSI, or doing something where you have access to possibly CUI data or something else of that sort, then 100% that line should be drawn in the sand and say, hey, look, no personal devices. It's just too much risk involved. Everyone that works here is essentially a target, whether you're low man on the totem pole all the way up to the top. Then when you start talking about the more commercial endeavors or the more commercial companies, it really depends on your level of risk, right? What do you feel is acceptable? I've leaned towards allowing personal devices with massive amount of controls in place, right? When I say massive amount of controls, if you allow personal devices, you also need to have corporate devices where if there are those people, those individuals that are in your corporate environment that have that level of access to data, your entire C-suite, I'd say from middle management up that make decisions on things, they should probably have a corporate device, but also have the ability to have a personal device. But that personal device should never be able to access the same amount of things that that corporate device can.
Yeah. And that's a hard sell at that level because the execs are kind of like, they want what they want. They want it now or yesterday. And
Right.
you work for them. You're not going to tell them what they can and can't do. So, sometimes I think it is an educational process to get them to buy in on that. I know Drew has a couple more questions we want to get to. I did want to throw this out because you mentioned Imperium. If you're listening to this, some of the other things I know that are floating out there, and I'm not advocating for any of these, but they're things to just check out if you're looking for things that might be floating in your ecosystem. I've heard of and seen Lookout in different organizations.
Mhm.
I think all of the endpoint security vendors have a mobile offering. So there's a Microsoft Defender for,
Yep.
for endpoint that's supposed to do some threat management type of,
MTD.
yeah. Sophos, CrowdStrike. I think any endpoint security vendor probably has a mobile offering. I've seen a few of them. They are varying degrees of horrible. Some are less horrible than others. Jamf, I know, has some offerings in that space. I think that's just in the iOS ecosystem. And I've heard of some new ones popping up like Fleet. And there's actually two companies that have mobile solutions called Fleet. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes with Drew. So there are other things out there, but I think this is one of those where you've got to understand your endpoints and your use models and just test them out and see what works for you there.
Agreed, JJ. I did want to come back to that. Just have an MTD, right? Like it doesn't,
Yeah.
you don't have to have a specific one, but you have to have some level of, and MT, when I say MTD, it really just equals visibility.
Yeah.
have some level of visibility into your mobile devices and those that mobile devices that are touching your environment. And you jogged my memory when you were saying that the last thing that I mentioned in terms of layering on that security is the basically enterprise browser solution, where that adds in a level of protection where, hey, you now have protection around your Safari or your Chrome, or you can say, hey, we're only going to use this specific browser. And that really kind of cuts down on an attack vector where a threat actor wants to get onto the device and they're going to try and route through the Safari browser or something else, and that gets shut down there. Right. So it's just different levels of security in terms of layering on security and visibility.
So I get the idea behind MTD, but I also feel like we go through this with every stage of InfoSec where like IDS gave us visibility into our network traffic, and firewalls give us visibility into that network traffic, and endpoint software gives us visibility into endpoints and laptops and so on. It also creates a lot of noise. It also creates a lot of dashboards to look at, reports to go through, false positives, false negatives. How do I keep from adding another fire hose to the 7 fire hoses that I'm already trying to deal with on everything else that I'm taking care of? Like I can't even keep up with, patching vulnerabilities on servers and routers and switches.
That's a great question, Drew. And honestly, a massive challenge, right? And I
Yeah.
say it's a massive challenge because the threats for mobile devices are different than the threats for other endpoints. So honestly, I think it boils down to you need to develop a team. I don't think this is necessarily something that you can just say, I'm going to throw this at my existing team. If you think about it, for a lot of organizations now, your mobile devices in your environment are going to, if they haven't already, eclipse your other endpoints, right? So you have to give them the proper attention that they need, right? If you have, let's call it for round numbers, 10,000 workstation, laptops, servers, all the others in your environment, but you now have 15,000 mobile devices that are connecting to your environment, I think it warrants at least putting some money and backing into that part of your cybersecurity practice.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a huge blind spot.
Massive.
Now, we've talked about this for enterprise. I'm curious, as we're going to be coming into the home stretch here with our questions, do you have advice for consumers for their own protection?
For consumers, I do. As a consumer, you have to be vigilant. And when I say vigilant, I mean it's best for you to put yourself into the mindset that as a consumer, you are a corporation or an entity that has data that someone wants. I know it's hard to think that, like, who would want my data? I'm just Akili. Like, who cares? No, somebody wants it, and it could be manipulated for various different reasons and leveraged against you or leveraged against your employer. That being said, think about what you're connecting to. If you are in the airport and you're cycling through different Wi-Fi's to get on because you can't stream Netflix while you wait for your now 2-hour delayed flight. I'm not going to say which airline, but you're now 2-hour delayed flight and you're trying to jump onto the fastest one so you can hurry up and download the Netflix show that you wanted to watch on the flight. Think about what you're doing before you jump onto that network. A. B, think about what you're going to do while on that network. Because I know a lot of you are just still going to do it, right? Right. So think about what you're going to do while on that network, right? Don't go checking your bank, please. Don't go log into your Vanguard and your 401k and do all these things. Because one of the things that we talked about earlier, JJ, is these applications, you don't know how they were coded. You just know the functionality. So you don't know that they're actually passing passwords in clear text. You don't know that they actually have, API keys hard coded. You don't know that there's all of these different vulnerabilities that are happening and what data they're actually sending across the wire. You just know you're receiving the functionality of it. So be conscious about what you're doing and what you're doing on what network. I'd say the second thing is only download apps from official app stores, please, please. Like these third-party app stores, they might be great. You might be able to get some old app that you just loved so much, but please stick to the official ones because although they are not ironclad, it is better than the third party ones. They still have a lot of security built into the actual process of getting onto the platform and staying on the platform. That's another thing. So just try to stick with the official app stores and also stick with official and reputable app developers. Quick little story. So every once in a while, I get squirrely and I'll develop an app, right? And so I have a developer account with both Apple and Android. And I recently received an email from some random individual, and I'll spare you the details, but it basically boiled down to them saying, "Hi, I noticed that you're a developer on," because they list your information on the actual app stores, right? "I noticed that you're a developer that's on the iOS App Store, and I want to ask for a favor. I've been trying to get onto the App Store, and I have been unsuccessful. It's so hard to get on there. Would you be okay with taking my application and deploying it underneath your account? I will pay you in Bitcoin,"
Wow.
right?
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here like, you know what? I can't be mad at them for asking, right?
Yeah.
But but at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be a ton of people that took up this offer,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, nice try, dude.
Right. So just be very mindful of the app stores you're on, where you're getting the apps from, and the developer that you're utilizing or the developer that you're downloading these apps from.
Speaking of that, I know we're running a little past our usual target time, but
All right.
I've got one more question that I feel like everybody wants to know the answer to, since you're talking about kind of malicious apps that sneak in under people. We've heard a lot about some of the, the zero-click malware, whether it's coming in through SMS or maybe even, something via email or Signal, WhatsApp, any of those messaging apps. Is that a thing? And how worried should people be about that?
Yeah. So that thing currently is named Pegasus, right? That's the infamous name that's out there, but it is not the only one, right? Should people and CISOs be concerned? 100%, undoubtedly. The idea is essentially that you now have threats that are out there that are zero click threats that are basically preying on the fact that there's an application or a native application on the device that is going to automatically either run or preview a link that is going to then allow for that route to some place where a payload is going to be dropped. That payload will end up on the actual device, and then they'll go back and do cleanup. Right? Once they get onto the device, they'll go back and delete the message and you'll never even know that it was there. You might have seen the notification come in, go to take a look and see what the notification was for, and it's just gone, right? This isn't new. Pegasus has been around for a while, but it's going to continue, right? And it's one of those things where for CISOs, you have to ask yourself, does this risk warrant me taking additional steps to protect my environment? And I think the overwhelming answer is yes.
Are these level of attacks, prevalent? Should the normal average, Joe or even director in an organization be worried about these? Or is this more like they're going to reserve this for, that top 0.01% of targets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to answer it directly, this is much more of a nation state or top tier targeted campaign that we're talking. Let's just say these entities like the NSO group or any of the other major groups that actually do mobile device exploitation, you can Google them, there's a lot of them. They don't do this for free, right?
Yeah.
This is a pay to play environment. They say that they do it only for law enforcement and only for governments for, counterterrorism and other sorts of investigations, but the verdict's still out on that. So with that being said, a lot of these are going to cost a lot of money, right? Let's just say for rough numbers, hypothetically, for you to utilize one of these exploits, it's $1.6 million,
Mm.
right? If you ask yourself as a CISO, oh, well, that's a lot of money. Nobody's going to target me for that. Well, think again, because if that $1.6 million can be overshadowed by what they can make
Mm.
off of that campaign, then that $1.6 million is a great investment.
Yeah, it's just the cost of business.
Well,
Yeah.
exactly. Cost of doing business. So don't think that you're not susceptible to being targeted by a nation state threat actor or some very sophisticated attacks. Because if there's a dollar to be made, it's going to be made.
Yeah. So does MTD mobile threat detection help with something like a Pegasus type attack, or is that they're usually working on 0 days and
It depends. It depends on your MTD, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Not all MTDs are made the same, right?
Uh,
JJ mentioned this earlier, right? Not all MTDs are made the same. But from the ones that I know, the ones that I mentioned beforehand, they do detect this, right? And they detect this based off of the threat intelligence that they've done in terms of seeing it in the wild, and they're able to basically not only assign a signature, but assign a behavioral identity to it.
mhm,
With that being said, though, there is always 0 days,
sure.
right? Always. And it's going to be like that for forever. And a lot of these companies that develop things like Pegasus and other lawful interception tools.
There's like a verbal air quote
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. Air quote, lawful interception tools. These are 0 days that just haven't really been discovered,
Mhm,
that they're keeping and monetizing, right? Some of these O days are never going to see the light of day, right? Some of them are trapped in a vault in some basement skiff somewhere, right? And they'll never see the light of day until there's a target that presents enough of a reason as to why they should use it. But there will always be 0 days. Just make sure the best way to defend against it is to use an MTD that actually has a robust enough level of visibility on the device to detect when things are happening inside of that attack kill chain,
mhm.
right?
Okay. Yeah. So it's just like any other platform.
Right. So if it begins with a smish, allow it to detect that smish, right?
Mhm,
Does that MTD detect that smish? Yes or no? Right? Because once that smish is clicked or once that actual message is come in, then it's off to the races.
mhm. So, Akili, this has been a great conversation, and I think I'm going to go take my phone and put it in the microwave for a couple of minutes and then go get a flip phone. So, thank you for that. If folks are interested in contacting you, reaching out, do you blog or you public or on LinkedIn? What's up there?
Yeah, really simple. Only place I am on is LinkedIn. And when you go into LinkedIn to try to find me, you have to spell out my whole name. So it's Akili Akridge, and I'll pop up.
All right, LinkedIn. We'll have that link in the show notes. Again, thank you, Akili, for being here. This was a fantastic conversation. And thanks to our listeners for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. If there's a topic you want us to cover, or you have a comment, a correction, or a question, you can reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. We do appreciate when listeners follow up. By the way, Packet Protector is part of the Packet Pushers podcast network. That network includes a dozen technical podcasts for your professional development on networking, security, IPv6, DevOps, and more. We also have an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, a community Slack group, a YouTube channel, and an IRC group. You can find it all at packetpushers.net, all free with no login required. And as always, remember to do those mobile security push-ups.